Hi, everyone. This is Craig Zelzer back for episode 4, season 13 of the PCDN Social Change Career Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking with Mara Tissera Luna about decolonization and social change careers. Just for people who have not joined a social change career podcast live stream before, a couple of quick notes. This usually goes about an hour. We really enjoy hearing from people where you're watching from, your questions and your comments, particularly on LinkedIn, but also YouTube. So throughout the session in LinkedIn comments, feel free to add a few bullet points about your work and questions, favorite resources. This will be converted to one of over 160 episodes of the Social Change Career Podcast on Friday, so you can listen to the audio episode. And three other quick requests. Please consider sharing and rating the podcast. That's the number one thing you can do for any podcaster in the world. If whether it's ours or anybody else's, if you like it, take 30 seconds to rate it in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever platform you listen in. Please follow Mara on LinkedIn. We'll also share her website later. And please follow PCDN and consider subscribing to our weekly Impact newsletter. So Mara is a social anthropologist and independent consultant who has provided services for 16 universities, NGOs, and international agencies in over 14 countries. Her work focuses on child protection, forced migration, and preventing gender-based violence using decolonial frameworks. She's a fellow at Georgetown University's Collaborative on Global Children's Issues. It's a mouthful, but I still teach at Georgetown. I was a professor there for 10 years, and they do amazing work. And is a member of the ACPHA's Localization Advisory Group and CLASCO, the Latin American Council of Social Sciences. I'm based in Medellin, Colombia. Mara, you're based in the Bay Area, correct?
And California, yeah.
Yes, thank you. But originally from Argentina, and thank you for taking time to share your wisdom, experience, and questions with us. And again, as we're going throughout this, please, if you're watching on LinkedIn, share your comments and questions as much as possible. We like to make this super engaging. So Mara, thanks again. And can you talk a little bit about how would you summarize either the past or the current focus of the type of work you're doing?
Thank you very much, Craig, for inviting me and to speak with the community that you have created with a lot of effort, of course, and appearing on this podcast that you also do with a lot of effort. So thank you very much. And so, as you said, I am Argentinian. I come from Buenos Aires. I started my career there in 2009. So, almost 15 years ago, I suppose it would be. At the beginning, I focused mainly on child protection. And after I moved to Hungary, you also lived in Hungary. We have already had this conversation. Your last name is Hungarian, so or German Hungarian. I think that's why I wrote to you on the first time that I wrote to you, because you also studied at Central European University. As you know, during the 2015 so-called refugee crisis, many quotation marks for those who are listening to this on the podcast, Hungary didn't take a good human rights-based, protection-oriented, as we would call it, approach towards people entering the territory through Serbia, for example. And that fueled an interest in me to start working on forced migration. And I took advantage of my time at CU to learn more about forced migration, refugee law. And one of my first jobs in Hungary was for the Hungarian Helsinki Committee, that is the only organization providing free legal assistance and representation in Hungary to asylum seekers and refugees. It is a UNHCR implementing partner in Hungary. And that's the story of my career mainly. 2.5 years ago, I was able to move to California, to the US. And that has allowed me to again start working in the Latin American region, which is my specialty, my expertise. I study Latin American studies and Afro Latin American studies. So coming back to the region was the best thing that has happened to my career, that could have happened to my career. And we can speak more about these types of geographical specialization later if the audience is interested in this.
And as Mara said, I'll put a plug in for Central European University. I did my master's there, and I was in the guinea pig class, I think the third year. So I did mine actually. I lived in Hungary for 3 years, but I did my master's in Czech Republic, and Mara did hers in Hungary, and now the main campus is in Austria, since the Hungarian government, particularly the prime minister, has become somewhat repressive and actually basically kicked them out. But if you're, and CU is not paying for this, but if you're looking for master's or graduate programs, PhD programs, it's an amazing institution. They take students from around the world and have generous levels of funding. So going back to Argentina, can you talk a little bit about, let's say, when you were in your teenage years? Did you study literature, psychology, politics, and how did you build this interest, or when did it come to you that you could be working on migration and children's rights as a career?
Of course. So I studied high school special. So in Argentina, we only have one high school, so 5 years of high school. And mine was specialized in psychology, pedagogy, so a lot of Paulo Freire that I think many people know in the global north too. And the thing that motivated me the most to pursue a career in human rights or social change was that when I was 15 years old, 16 years old, the trials for human rights violations during our latest dictatorship were reopened. So the president decided to take up the demands from civil society organizations, human rights organizations, Madre de Plaza de Mayo, Abuela de Plaza de Mayo organizations made up of the relatives of the disappeared and restarted the trials again. Since then, 1,200 former repressors went through trial and were convicted, and the main authorities during the dictatorship died in common jail, which is what we all want to see in the global south. So our former dictators hopefully being tried and ending their lives in jail, in common jail. So justice, basically being served justice. And that fueled my interest in working with human rights. And then another characteristic in my life is that my mom is an expert in children's rights. She says psychology. And so I grew up learning about psychology of children. My mom used to speak a lot about her work with us. I have a brother, but okay, I was the one who probably took it more seriously, and that was what made me want to pursue a career connected to the protection of populations I thought were more exposed to violence and to being vulnerable and suffering. And that's how I chose this career that I am developing now.
And can you talk a little bit, and for people who don't know Paulo Freire, a brilliant, I mean, he's not alive anymore, but brilliant Brazilian educator, philosophy, who wrote lots of things and did a lot of applied work. His most famous book is Pedagogy of the Oppressed, but there's lots of other stuff. And then also there's a great Brazilian theater practitioner, Augusto Bao, and lots of people have built on that. And he has a book called Theater of the Oppressed. But can you talk a little bit about, what did that mean to you? And then whether post secondary school or college, how did you decide what to study? And then did you start landing your first work, paid work through internships or connections? And how did you, because working on child rights, it's such a important issue, and you can approach it from a policy perspective, a rights perspective, a social services. So how did you wind up finding the area that would lead to gainful employment and also that fit your interests?
Yeah, of course. So when it comes to thinkers and theories, myself, my friends, we were very lucky that in Argentina, at least in the University of Buenos Aires, where I studied, and probably in the other national public for free universities, it is the same. We learn a lot about our own Latin American theories, thinkers, writers. It is not only European theory, French theory, which is what is more common to study at university in Latin America. So European writers, that's the most common thing. Because I studied anthropology, we also covered Latin American critical thought, which started in 1920, more or less. Latin American feminist thinking, feminist theory, and other areas of study that are usually known as useless majors, because societies don't always see the value that history, anthropology, social geography, pedagogy can have. And I was able to specialize in those useless majors. And the challenge, I will jump so that I can explain basically the biggest challenge that I've had in my career, which was living in Hungary. Of course, the main specialty that would help you find employment in Hungary is knowing how the post-Soviet world. So Latin America and Hungary are connected in the sense that Mexico, Brazil, Argentina hosted thousands, tens of thousands of Hungarian refugees since 1860 until 1956. So basically for one entire century. But the connections are not as strong as with other European countries. So it was quite hard for me, of course, to find employment in Hungary. And then I was luckily able to work for the Helsinki Committee, but I knew that that was not a solution in the long term to develop a career. So not only having a job, an occupation, let's say, but also building a long-lasting career where I could do what I am interested in, that is research. And that was my main challenge. And that's how I decided to start being an independent consultant, because that would allow me to focus on what I wanted to focus, which is the Latin American region, social change, research for advocacy and policy change, and in the region that I care the most about. And that's how I am an independent consultant. And that's how developing my career as an independent researcher, consultant, evaluator, I was able to finally do what I really wanted to do from the beginning.
Um, Thank you so much. And again, feel free, if people watching on LinkedIn or YouTube, add your comments and questions. So, I mean, I have a million questions. I won't, go for a million, but I've been, I lived in Central and Eastern Europe for many years. I've been living in Latin America for 7, spent time in many other places. And part of this talk is focusing, or the episode's focusing on decolonization, and and connecting that to careers. And so a comment is, I've been coming, my wife is Colombian, we met during our PhDs, Catalina, and I've been coming to Colombia since 25 years. And I remember my first trip here, I knew nothing about Latin America, but she has been very involved in the peace, an activist movement. And so my first trip, we went to a national meeting of peace builders. And I remember even back then that the capacity and the knowledge and experience is so rich in Colombia. I mean, they've had 60 years of a lot of challenge and 60 years of armed conflict, and also many peace processes. And even thinking back then with my limited Spanish, or non-existent, is that Colombia has so much to share with the world, and they don't necessarily need Western, let's say people from the global North, or theories that aren't relevant to their context being imported. I mean, it can help. So when you think about decolonization in both your work, and you talked a little bit about in terms of Argentina, some of the theories and models you worked with, like what in the world does this term mean? Because it's huge. And how did that apply to your career? So when you are doing applied research, whether it's your own or for an organization or an academic project, what does it mean to have a decolonial lens, or or both in terms of the research and the theories that help guide your work?
Yes, of course. So no one is against international cooperation, countries cooperating with each other, is between many quotation marks, again, experts helping other countries develop what exists in their countries and is working well. No one is against that. The problem is that historically, the exchanges and the aid between quotation marks again and the cooperation is very unilateral. So as you said, it is professionals from the global north, organizations from the global north, providing funding and or technical expertise to the global south. And many of us want that to be reverted. We want that to be democratized. So the knowledge creation processes that take place in our field should be more democratic, more inclusive, should take into consideration alternative, between quotation marks again, viewpoints from indigenous people, from community-based organizations, from feminist groups, etc., that are not that common in international aid in general. So I like the word democratization. Democratization means another thing. It already has a meaning in our sector, so I don't use it because it doesn't make sense. It won't make sense for the person listening to it. But to me, decolonization means exactly that, the democratization, so equity, justice between the global north and global south within international cooperation. And something important is that we speak a lot about innovation and finding new ways of dealing with global challenges. But in the past years, we have seen that many of the issues that we are trying to address are new versions of previously seen historical processes that, again, the useless majors have studied in detail. So decolonization also means coming back to the origins, for example, using decolonial theories that were developed in the 60s, so in the post-colonial war. As I said before, in Latin America, this started before because all of our countries got their independence in the 18th century. So the process is previous. Decolonial thought can be traced to probably the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 20th. And coming back to those theories that probably can give us answers to the issues of, as I said before, injustice, inequality that we face in international cooperation today.
Thank you so much, and welcome, Mustafa. And again, please let us know where you're watching from, your questions. So a related question, obviously in the U.S., we live in Colombia. I'm a resident of Florida. For many years, I was a resident of the DC area. And so obviously there is we were just in Argentina in July for a couple of weeks. And in many places in the world, there's a huge backlash by certain political leaders or conservative leaders against anything, whether it's inclusion, equity, feminist studies. It's a Central European University. They have, I'm not sure, but they still have a very good gender studies department. I have friends who went through it, a master's program, and Hungary tried to shut down gender studies, saying, again, we don't need that. That's a useless major. In Argentina, there's some of the same efforts. We don't need those useless majors. We need business or engineering. Any thoughts about kind of this backlash in certain parts of the world when actually we need equitable perspectives and research and democratizing access to knowledge more than ever?
Yeah, so it's important anyway to clarify that yes, Hungary and Argentina, two cases that I know, have criticized the so-called useless majors, but they have lowered funding for all majors. It is not like they discriminate between engineering and, I think it is important to mention that some governments want to defund higher education in general, and the entrance like the little door to do that is saying that some of the majors are useless, but in the end they defund the whole educational system or privatize part of the educational system, privatize the whole so that is their final goal. So I think it is important to say that, authoritarian governments won't stop at attacking only one social group usually, or one major in this case, they will expand as much as possible. And this is why we need to defend our democracies like there's no tomorrow, because we know where the attacks start, but we don't know where it will end. So we all need to defend everyone, all minorities, all the time, and the quality of our democracies more generally, because these types of authoritarian rule and authoritarian practices, even if the government is not classified as an authoritarian or autocratic one, can expand to all aspects of life. So just to clarify that. And yes, it is super, super important to improve, as I said before, democratic collaboration between universities, for instance, because even within the European Union, we saw the case of Central European University that which was kicked out of a country of Hungary by the government just because Viktor Orban is the Prime Minister of Hungary. Listeners, Viktor Orban has been in power for the past 13 to 14 years, so quite a long time, and he has been able to dismantle the democratic institutions, rule of law institutions, checks and balances institutions, and so on. And this allowed him to pass a law to kick out a university from the country. And this happened within the European Union, that is the strongest cooperation, multilateral cooperation body there is. So, and a defender of human rights in theory. This can happen to any of us, anywhere, basically, and we need to defend each other. Since I am answering this question, I also thank all of the organizations and universities that made statements to protect University of Buenos Aires, the university where I studied, and the public for free high educational system in Argentina, because that is very important. So other researchers from other countries speaking out the contributions of Argentinian researchers to world science. So 5 Nobel Prizes and thousands of researchers abroad developing solutions to problems. And I think that is important. Solidarity, true solidarity between institutions. The word solidarity has been washed because so many multilateral organizations and bodies started using it, just like the word intersectionality and other terms that are empty, so that different institutions and people can give them meaning. But it is important to come back to true solidarity and helping each other. For example, to raise awareness of what is happening within our countries and to defend our institutions against attacks by authoritarian governments or authoritarian-like or autocratic governments. So I think that that's the main solution or the main response, solidarity.
Thank you so much. And we have people from Germany, Colombia, Hungary, the US, and other places. So please keep letting us know where you're watching from. And I assume, Mara, you're drinking mate. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's either mate or I quit my job. I quit everything that I am doing because this is the only thing that fuels me throughout the day.
Okay. Yes. So again, thank you everyone for joining from around the world. Keep letting your questions come. And just one little side note, I lived in Hungary 90 to 91, 92 to 94. And just interesting how politics can change, because that was maybe I moved there 9 months after the collapse of the Berlin Wall. And Viktor Orban and a group of young people, they created a political party called Fidesz. And it was a liberal, super fun, kind of crazy party. And they had a rule. They just made fun of politics, but they actually were very progressive. And they had a rule that you had to be under 35 to be an official member, because they were trying to change from the socialist regime. And it's just so interesting and also crazy to see how leaders can go from, let's say, liberal progressive to close to dictatorship, and that's happened in many countries. So just when I lived there, it was a much different time in Hungary of kind of transition, but also and excitement, also chaos, but it was a different kind of chaos. And it is so going back to, can you talk a little bit about, like, as an independent consultant, what do you actually do on a daily or weekly or monthly basis? Like, what type of projects or engagements do you work on? How do you get them? And for people who are either already have a career related to rights or migration consulting, any tips? Or for people who are like, this is so cool, how do I start building a career? Any tips or cautions?
Yeah, so particularly about consulting, not working in general. I saw. So, for someone who just starts, what I usually recommend that I love is some books. I have a post there on LinkedIn. Maybe you can link it afterwards on the show notes. But I follow. One second. I will look at the name of the author. It will be easier. Cal Newport. Cal Newport doesn't belong to international aid or anything. I don't mind. I read lots of books, and yeah, this is important also. If you want to have your own company and work on your own and all of this, start reading business books, because usually the stuff that we read is not connected to making money from what you know in any way, shape, or form. We know this. So read other books, and the one that I recommend always is Cal Newport. He's an engineer. He's a professor at Georgetown University too. I started reading him many, 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 many years ago because he also provides advice for students. So how to be a grade A student is one of his first books. And what he recommends, and this is what I did, was to forget about your passion. So stop looking for your passion. Forget about, at the beginning at least, forget about building a career based on your passion, at least in the first year, for first couple of years, first years, and focus instead on further developing and enhancing your skills for which there's a market. So where there's someone who will employ you. Again, this is very obvious, but if you studied anthropology like me, no one ever taught you how to make money out of what you have just studied for 80 years. This is a thing. So don't follow your passion. This goes without saying. All of us who work in human rights and international aid, humanitarian aid, we have a strong passion for serving, for helping, and for trying to make the world a less bad place, basically, or a better place, a less unjust place, or a more equal, just place for everyone. But that's not what should be the basis for your career decisions. Focus first on what you do well and that you will get paid for, and then everything else will come. It is like the typical, what is the name of this graph with three,
Yeah,
Venn diagram?
the Igagi model out of Japan about kind of
Yes, I
passion and
always
what the
forget the name. Yeah. So yeah, the passion, what will make you money and what you're good at. But at the very beginning, the strongest size of that Venn diagram will be making money based on something that you do well. And then later you will develop your passion. What Cal explains is that you go into a positive feedback loop where, because you're doing well, you get excited about your job. With that, you can invest part of the money, part of your income in education for what you really want to do. For example, I did my first Latin American studies graduate certificate while I was still working in Hungary, but it didn't matter. I knew that in the long term I was going to work in Latin America, so I spent part of my salary in studying Latin American studies, even though it had nothing to do with my job description. And you can do the same. Luckily, nowadays, okay, we need to speak about inequality in international cooperation. For us who come from global south countries and have some level of ambition, we will get nowhere without a graduate degree from a global north university. We know this. I don't like it when how can I say this? People from the global north who don't belong to minorities say things like, no, you don't need a graduate degree, because us, we all need a graduate degree just to get noticed, or like to achieve the bare minimum of people knowing that we exist, of other professionals knowing that we exist, we are there, like we are working in this field. We need to at least have a degree from a global north university. This is a huge inequality from international cooperation that we need to annihilate. We need to make it disappear. There shouldn't be an entry barrier, which is having a graduate degree or a degree from a global north-based university, but this is the way it is. So I won't say that you can replace a master's degree, for example, with Coursera. Like, this is not a thing. It doesn't work like this, and this is not true. But yeah, if you have any opportunity to further valuable skills or skills that are valued in the labor market, do it. For these short courses are enough. There's no need to do a master's degree to learn about, monitoring and evaluation. There are many practical ways of learning the same. And I would totally recommend that. And for the ones who studied quote unquote useless majors, the same. Try to find a way to apply what you have learned. So in my case, it was qualitative research methods, and also alternative methodologies or participatory methodologies, alternative epistemology, so alternative ways of seeing the world, and see how you can apply that in real life jobs so that you can be hired for for the skills that you want to apply in your work. In my case, I did that with monitoring and evaluation. So the thing that I knew best was doing research, and the next best thing adjacent area of work in international cooperation is monitoring and evaluation to doing research. So when I became a consultant at the very beginning, I started doing what I knew that I was going to be paid for, even if it was not my favorite thing to do. And this is what I recommend to everybody else. Again, don't focus on your passion at the beginning. Focus on what you will get paid for, and the rest will come with networking, with developing whatever skill that you need for your passion, to develop your passion. In the end, that will come. But at the first, when you make the first steps, focus on what you will be paid for. And so at the beginning, I worked doing proposals for funding and monitoring and evaluation. And then with the months, as months passed by, I started getting contracts for qualitative research, which is what I wanted to do. Sorry, it's such a long answer, but it
No, yeah.
was like quite a general question. I hope that I answered the question.
Oh yeah, you don't have to say sorry. I think it's wonderful. And just a little plug, we do a lot on upskilling in PCDN. You can check out our YouTube channel, or career campusers follow us on LinkedIn. But this whole month we're doing on to grad or not to grad, how to land fellowships and alternatives. And so, I mean, lots of questions come out of what you said. So one just very practical question, because I agree 100%, and that it's important to have a passion or something that excites you. I mean, obviously it's a privilege. A lot of people in the world aren't able or fortunate enough to have a job where they can have some passion. So I don't want to say that. It's also elitist to say like, oh, you should be able to work with something that's making a positive impact in the world, because there are not enough jobs for everybody. That's one of the challenges around, and our policies are not built in a way to create sustainable and ethical employment for everybody. We could do it, we just don't. But one question, to go back to that thing of find out what you can get paid for. So this is something I've done a lot of original research on, and many people have this vision. I want to work in human rights or peace or startups or be on the front lines of negotiation. And often the demand side of the organizations that are willing to pay for these roles is much greater than the supply side of people who want to have, the supply side of people who are seeking these roles. So any thoughts, whether it's on migration or rights or research, how do you figure out what are the places where you get paid for the skills that you have or could develop. Because I've seen lots of people like, oh, I'm going to get a graduate degree and I'm going to learn X and then I'll get a job. Not always a direct connection. Or I'm going to get an extra upskilling, and I talk about this a lot. I think sometimes people put much more thought into if they have a life partner or buying a house or buying a car than they do into upskilling or grad degrees. So just any thoughts about how to better select the training or where to understand, because we live in a capitalist society. And so where is the money going to pay people for these type of careers or to find that match?
So it is a very hard question to answer also because this depends on geopolitics. Now, for example, we are waiting very anxiously for the US elections because that will partly also change international aid, international development, international cooperation priorities, and funding. And so, yeah, this is basically what I want to say. I am not for giving individuals the responsibility for something that they don't have. It is hard to predict what funding trends will take place by the time you graduate if you have just started to study. So, what I would say is a couple of things directed towards institutions, not individuals. So, number one, all traineeships and fellowships and what is their internships yeah, should be paid. Sometimes they are seen as an extension of your graduate studies, but they are not. You are working during a fellowship or an internship, so they should all be paid, and they should be fairly paid. So not receiving a 20% less than the line of poverty in that country, which is also usually what happens. So that you go and do your internship while being a legit poor person, like classified as a poor person, but fair pay, so that is something that is institutional. Individuals, there's an initiative so to pay interns. It is there on LinkedIn. I share that from time to time. But we need, of course, international organizations, NGOs agreeing to pay interns, trainees, fellows. So that would be important. And the second thing is that whether you can develop your career or not the way you want, so the way whether you can pursue your passion or not, let's say, depends too much on your personal situation, and in a more just and fair international cooperation system, that's not the way it should be. That the more privileges, that social privileges that you have, the easier it is to develop the career that you want. This is very obvious with passports. We have the rankings of passports. We know what we can see, like we can Google that right now, what passports are stronger than other ones. And that is a reflection in international cooperation in who gets what post where, how much they make in comparison to national workers, for example. This is a known, I don't know if controversy, but in injustice of the huge gap between international salaries and national salaries. Where you can work is also determined by that. In the case of being a consultant, in many countries, you need an initial capital to invest. What we do is not so, we don't sell products, so it is not as bad as having a shop, as having a real shop, a non-metaphorical shop. But you still need to have you need to make an investment. You need to have had saved money during your previous employment, which is what I did. You need to have or either previous contacts or some kind of network that can hire you for the first time in many cases, because it is hard to get the ball running. So basically too many factors of whether you're successful or not in international cooperation depend on your individual circumstances. And that's not the way it should be. International cooperation is about cooperating, learning from each other, learning from different perspectives, and if only a very small portion of people who have certain characteristics can get to certain places and to leadership roles and all of that. That's not what we are doing. That's not diversity. That's not. It is harder to advance the human rights cause like this, at least from my viewpoint. So I don't have. I don't. My advice for individuals is what I said before about reading Cal Newport and following each and every advice because it is very solid advice. But the way this will be solved, so these high entry barriers and also the fact that many people are working in I don't want to say undignifying working conditions because that's not the word, but working conditions where they don't have all of the rights that workers should have. That is an institutional systemic issue, and that needs to be tackled by organizations, not by individuals. Also, between parentheses, and this is the last thing that I will say. I don't like it when individuals are kind of blamed for systemic issues. You know, as I said before, a group of interns organize themselves to ask for good working conditions and for being paid. Is this necessary? Why do the interns need to organize themselves? It is self-evident that an intern is working. It is labor. They need to be compensated, and they need to be compensated fairly because usually being an intern, especially for certain organizations, requires to move to cities where those organizations are located, and that also requires an investment. Like the same thing as before, there are too many steps to even start developing your career when you're young. And that is an institutional systemic issue. It is not individuals that will solve it. It will be organizations taking up and respecting the demands from those organized individuals. So that's what if you need to take anything from this, pay your interns, I suppose.
Okay.
Pay your employees fairly, pay your interns if you're an organization. I suppose this is the main message.
Thank you so much. Couldn't agree more. And there is a great organization. I forgot the founder's name. It's Carlos in the U.S. called Pay Our Interns, and they started maybe 6 years ago. And this was focused on the U.S. But obviously, many people in the U.S., if they're fortunate enough to go to undergrad or grad, internships can be such a crucial way to build networks and experience. There's a lot of exploitation, but also sometimes they can be amazing. And they really worked both on raising the issue, which has been talked about for decades, but really pressuring organizations and even the federal government, because there was lots of unpaid federal internships, to say, like, this is an equity issue, a class issue, and that if we want to have a more equitable society, it shouldn't be, I mean, I worked the whole time under undergrad, but I worked part-time. My parents paid for undergrad. So I didn't have, like, I did master's and PhD through other, but it's like, I didn't have to worry about tuition and I got to work on the side. And so if you don't have those financial resources or family support, and they actually did get a lot of successes. I think State Department pays a lot of their interns, like they didn't get everywhere. And it's such a critical issue. And just one extra point I'd make before we go to the next question is that there are a lot of fellowships, and that I was fortunate when I was doing junior abroad in Hungary through my university. I came back and had a great advisor who just bugged me and said, apply for a fellowship. And I was like, that's only for important people. I applied and I got to go back to Hungary for 2 years. And I've had multiple fellowships and advised probably 1,000 people in fellowships. And fellowships, they are elitist, but if you learn how to match your professional skills and academic training with what fellow funders of fellowship are offering, and you learn how to do really good applications, that takes mentorship and practice. It's hard to do by yourself. I've been fortunate, that I had a fellowship for my master's. I've had fellowships for lots of things, and that particularly gave me the ability to do so much unpaid work because I was paid by the fellowship. And so, and Central University has lots of fellow funding, and Rotary Peace Fellowship, and right now IREX is recruiting for the State Department Young African Leaders Initiative. Like you got to get on the mindset, and again, doesn't mean it's easy or it'll work, but that's such a beneficial way that I think many people don't think about experience. There's both academic, professional, and research fellowship. So just, again, you could apply for 20 and get rejected from 20, but if you really understand the fellowship world and build really strong applications, it's possible to be successful, and it's a nice in between. So here's a very practical question that I get asked a lot, and I'm sure you get asked a lot. I don't want to get into numbers of how much you get paid, but like I just got a consultancy offer. I won't go into all the details, and I have like my rate, the daily rate, which is the obsession of consultants, of how much I charge for like a US government funded project versus a small NGO. I mean, I do lots of things for free too, and got offered a consultancy. And in my mind, I was like, oh, it's going to be at this rate. They offered me less than that, so it's a question. And I tried to negotiate it. I couldn't, like, they said, take it or leave it. It's still in process. But when you are consulting, because this comes up all the time, sometimes a consultancy will say this is our daily rate, or this is what we'll pay you in bulk, like 20% up front and at the end. But if you're applying for a consultancy, they don't list a rate, or it comes up later in negotiations, what is your advice, like how to best determine, not asking for you and specifically, but how do you decide on what you would ask for, or when people come to you and say, how do they figure out the market rate for their years of experience, technical experience, and the organization that would be hiring them? So any tips how you encourage others to think about that?
Yeah, of course. So first of all, in the same line as before, I think that we all consultants, we all collectively want organizations and agencies to publish what they are willing to pay, because it is then the burden of calculating how much the person will be paid comes, so falls onto the consultant, even though the consultant it doesn't have information about the budget that the organization has, and that is not good practice. And it also means that preparing a proposal for an organization takes much longer. Because of this, you need to do research on how much that organization would normally pay. And this is the way that you need to do research about how much the organization would normally pay. And this is something that depends a lot on the network you have. Again, this, in the end, the responsibility goes to the individual, when it would have been easier for everyone, for just the organization to publish how much they will pay. And also, so that consultants can consider whether that opportunity is worthwhile, worth their time or not. So that would be number one. Organizations should ideally publish how much they can pay. The second best next thing, I suppose, that I did when I started was to check UN salaries on my level for that country. So if you go to UN salaries, I think that the website is even unsalaries.org or something like this. You can see a list of countries. From there, you can download an Excel sheet with how much each person is paid based on their level. Then you should go to another website, another UN website, and check based on the number of years of experience that you have, how much the UN would pay an employee. You grab the final salary, because consultants, we pay for our own health insurance, we pay taxes, so we pay for many things that a UN staff wouldn't pay on their own out of pocket. So you need to grab the final number, the number that you see at the end of the row, no, now at the end of the column, and you divide that by 30 or 29 or 31, so by the number of days in the month where you will work. That would be at least a reference daily fee. After that, you need to adapt it to whoever is making the call. As you said before, Craig, it is not the same to create a budget for the UN than for a foundation, for example, or for a national organization or community-based organization. So then that needs to be adapted, of course. After a person has been working as a consultant for at least a year or so, they will be able to calculate their monthly fee or daily fee or hourly fee. In the US, hourly fees are used instead of daily fee, for example, based on how many hours they spent on the last year working on anything connected to consulting. So not only the tasks themselves for the contract, but also promotion, marketing, communications. In my case, because I am a researcher, I publish a lot on my own independently. So I count the hours that I spend writing articles and publishing them, editing them and publishing them independently. And then you can do the math and calculate how much money you need to cover all of your needs. So not because, for example, this is a good example. If you're a researcher publishing in independent sources, publishing things that are independent, that are not what you were hired for by an organization, gives you credibility, gives you legitimacy, and shows that you're truly independent. So you have independent thinking, you have critical thinking, and you can bring that to the organization once they hire you. So you need to continue publishing usually if you're a researcher. You also need to take that into consideration in the what would it be, the denominator of your calculations. But as soon as you start, that's the best thing that you can do. And that's what I did. Go to UN jobs, find out how much you will be paid per day, and then adapt that based on the client.
Thank you so much. And I get asked this all the time. And we have the PCN Career Campus. You can ask, if you become a member, DevEc has some good resources. I've had lots of former students ask me and just say, hey, this is what I'm getting paid. Is it fair? So other consultants, professors, mentors, because it's really important, because I find often people will undercut themselves, particularly when I've had consultancies where I don't ask for anything and they just say, here it is. And it's actually more than I ever expected. But generally I know, like, what is the rate? And in the US, it's often, if you're junior, it's 250, 300 a day. Mid-career, it depends on the client. Mid-career might be 400 to 600. Senior could be, 600 to 800. I know people who won't do stuff less than $2,000 a day, and other people will do it. So obviously it depends on, but it's important to have that in mind. It's also true for salary negotiations before you get to, if you're doing a proposal or before you get through your interview, to have that in mind. I've hired a lot of consultants. I used to work at IREX, a great place to look for jobs. I remember this like 30 years ago. I remember we used to hire people, I think it was $250 a day. In my mind, I'm like, that's so much money. That's like a gigantic. And then probably about 4 or 5 years later, I started, working as a consultant some, and I'm like, it's actually not that much money, because you take out 30% for taxes and no benefits and no security, because sometimes there's lots of work and sometimes no work. So, so it's really important to be realistic. But a couple of questions have come in, so I want to get to. So this is from Mustafa in Tunisia. Thank you, Mustafa. How does social change careers in less developed countries contribute to the decolonization process? And what challenges do practitioners face in advocating for sustainable development? I mean, it's a big question, but it's a kind of comment at the lens that you feel comfortable with.
And of course, so just to finish the previous point, there are certain skills that you will compulsorily have if you want, or develop. All skills can be developed. When you want to be a consultant, one of them is negotiation, communication skills, online marketing, public speaking, what else? Writing properly, project management too. So there are certain skills or a number of skills that all consultants need to have to be successful. Otherwise, you will face obstacles. Some of the things that you will do as a consultant can be outsourced, but these are basic basic traits of a consultant that everyone needs to have. So take that into consideration. As you said before, upskilling. So people might need upskilling that you don't get at the university. You need to do specialized courses or read a lot about the topic. And it's important also to remember that. So, how do social change careers in less developed countries contribute to the decolonization process? Um, okay, so I will answer with what I know. I suppose it will be enough. That is what I have developed for the course that I am delivering now. It is called Intersectionality and Decolonization in International Cooperation. It is for Spanish speakers who are based anywhere in the world but who work in cooperation towards Latin America or with Latin America or with Latin American organizations or are based in Latin America. And what I say is that each person in their little mini interactions, everyday interactions within their organizations, can try to make a change. I developed a game called Choose Your Own Adventure, and the name is on purpose because there are different forces contributing to an international aid system that is unequal and unfair. And, but part of that is connected to micro institutional interactions, so not only large historical processes and wars, for example, and structural events or structural processes, but also individual choices. And so Choose Your Own Adventure wanted to encourage everyone to do whatever they can to turn relations within international cooperation into relations that are more democratic, fair, and equal, especially between community-based organizations and INGOs. This said, so basically improving, I don't know what verb is used with the north-south divide, but improving or breaching the north-south divide, and we can all do something for this. When it comes to professionals from the global south specifically, I think that the main advice that I have is to be truthful to your values and to what you learned in your countries. Many times our knowledge and our viewpoints are not valued in international spheres. I have written about, for example, meaningful participation of migrant-led and refugee-led organizations in international fora, which is quite a recent development, even though it should have happened many decades ago. And it is happening in many organizations, large organizations, INGOs, UN agencies are working for refugees and migrants to be meaningfully involved in high-level decision-making processes. And this is my advice, anything that you can contribute to the conversation, please contribute to it. I don't remember why I started giving the example of migrants and refugees, but okay, that's basically it. All of us, by the fact that we were educated in different educational systems, the contents of what we saw are different. In my case, in many of my colleagues' case, the viewpoint that we have of what we do in our work in international cooperation, humanitarian aid, sustainable development, etc., is not hegemonic, is not mainstream, and this is our strength. So even though historically coming from the global south and, as I said before, not being educated in the global north institution has been seen as a weakness, it is not. It is our strength. Being different is what makes us stronger. Having a different viewpoint and creativity and innovation and different solutions to the problems that we try to address is our contribution, and we need to further develop that. So that would be my advice for anyone from the global south who is listening to this. As you know, I am very active on LinkedIn. And when I started, I had, I don't know, one follower. I don't know how many. And that was 3 years ago. It was not that of a long time ago. And now I have like 39,000 followers, something like that. I have quite a lot of positive responses to the resources and the free resources and the research that I post. And I think that most people can do something similar to this, try to communicate what you know, especially if you have something different to say to the mainstream. There's a lot of white noise in our field, and there are a million pieces of research and evaluations and publications and LinkedIn posts, social media posts, but many of them say kind of like the same because they are reproductions of what is mainstream in our field. So if you have something different to say it. It is important for us to have our voices listened as well. So that's what I would say. A tool for this is communication. That's what I said before. One of the tools that every consultant needs to further develop. We won't become communication experts or marketing experts, but develop it as far as we can, is communication, because that is the way to try to change things. And yeah, that's it. I suppose that's the main thing. And I don't work on sustainable development, so I don't have a lot to say about sustainable development.
Okay, thank you so much. So another question came in, which I'll ask, and then we'll start to wrap up. And welcome Parama from Bangladesh. We have people Scotland, Tunisia, all over. So again, thank you for joining us. So this question comes from Elvis, who is based in Scotland. But I think I'm not sure, originally from Africa. And again, this is a big question, so I'm going to try to focus a little bit. But what are the key challenges facing children in Africa, which again is huge? It could be health, it could be nutrition, it could be education, it could be gender-based violence, it could be displacement. So a question, not to make this specifically just for this, but what do you see? I mean, unfortunately, climate change is going to make migration even worse. I mean, I won't say worse, but like displacement and forced migration is going to radically increase in this week. So just like if someone's thinking about they want to work on youth, children, and migration, what do you see as the growth areas that might, again, this is not a forecast, but where you might see more opportunities, where there's going to be greater need, regardless if it's the US or Africa or Latin America or anywhere?
Yeah, so I only work in Latin America, and I can only answer questions. Don't know, and I don't know what, especially Africa is a 52 continent, 52 country continent, so it would be impossible for anyone to answer any question that covers Africa in general. So I won't, unfortunately, be able to answer this question. But what I can say is, yes, there are three main trends that will shape children's rights moving forward, especially children affected by the so-called humanitarian crisis. And these are climate change, the effects of climate change, the effects of environmental destruction, land spoliation also. The second one is, as you said, forced migration, forced displacement. This is because of the proliferation of conflicts and the worsening of conflict in the past years, and the worsening of the situation in conflicts that used to exist from before, so that are previous. We know that in 2023, there were more conflicts, more people affected by war than since the Second World War. So we are at a low point of civilians mainly being affected by war. And the third one, so that is the second one, war, conflicts. And the third one is forced displacement as a result of the previous two. So yes, unfortunately, and more people will need to leave their homes. This is not a negative thing on itself. I don't like the, fear fuel, fear mongering like communications on people having to leave their homes, because they need to leave their homes for real, and it is not their fault. So this is just a phenomenon, social phenomenon, historical phenomenon that we know that is aggravating, but that is not negative on its own. But these are the main three trends. And yeah, what I would say is to try to niche down as much as possible your interest. As I said before, um, I think that even despite colonialism and neo-colonialism, no one works like in Africa in general, right? That would be like a weird career path to have. So, or at least I haven't seen it. So focus on a sub-region that you're more interested in, or a country that you're more interested in. Of course, if you don't speak the language, learn the language, learn the national, at least the official national language, even if no indigenous languages, at least the one that the public administration of that country uses, and focus on how these three main trends that are worldwide uh, reflect themselves or show themselves in that particular country or sub-region, so that you can better prepare to address those particular contextualized issues, and not, children's rights in general. Try to niche down a little bit more. That would be my main advice.
Okay. We could go on forever. So we're going to start wrapping up, and you got lots of positive feedback from the answers you gave. Thank you, Juan, Pablo, Mustafa, and others. So to start wrapping up, so 3 questions. I'll just start with the first one. Where do you go? And again, I agree with you 100%. I spend a lot of time learning from other sectors. I have nothing to do with, I'm much more in social entrepreneurship now, but I read design thinking and urban planning and talk to engineers and neuroscientists. I just think, at least for me, if I only stay, whether it's peace building or social entrepreneurship, if I only talk to people who are doing same things, it just, my brain feels kind of flattened. And I was just at like a 3-day conference on neuroscience, and like, I don't know anything about neuroscience, but just such a different perspective. So I think the more I read a lot on marketing, the more you can get out of your field, like build your skills, but also learn from others, I think the better. But where do you go, whether it's on children's rights or migration or just finding interesting things? Do you have favorite podcasts, newsletters, publications, blogs, like any 2 or 3 favorite things that you would say, hey, if you want to get interesting content or upskill, these are places you regularly go to?
So I am a member of PCDN, as you know, so for a couple of months, and I read the newsletter. You sent out a mountain of resources every day, basically. So that would be one resource, of course. And I could recommend. I am a researcher, which means that I am reading all the time. So it is hard to recommend one single source. But a blog that has like been next to me for a very long time, like since 2018, I think 2017, is ethnography. Tobias Denskus, sorry if I am not pronouncing his name properly, has published many analyses of books and articles on decolonization, on new perspectives, on intersectionality, and on new perspectives, on alternative perspectives to the mainstream when it comes to international aid, international development. And I like that a lot. I totally recommend that. And that would be in English. Yeah, I also have some recommendations in Spanish. We can leave them on the show notes, I think. But I would recommend that. That blog was like my companion while I was living in Hungary, and I learned a lot from that particular blog. Yeah.
Okay. And thank you, Mustafa, for the extra feedback. And again, the recording will be live, and then in the show notes for the podcast on Friday, you'll have all the different, or as many of the resources as possible. Then the second question is, anything, doesn't have to do with your work, but any movies, shows, or just books that are occupying your brain in a good way?
Yeah, I started watching Veep, which is an old sitcom from the 2010s, and it's really funny. It has lots of punchlines, and I laugh a lot. I cry laughing, but also it is so realistic. So I thought that was very interesting. How many of the things that that happen on the sitcom are happening now in this moment, even though it was made 15 years ago. And as I said before, for career advice, go to Cal Newport. He also has a blog. He has a podcast. He has published many free resources, and he's the only person, or he's the only person whom I know, the only influencer, let's call it, a writer whom I know in the business sector, business field, who gives based, coherent, and how can you say this? And advice that works for normal people, so sensible advice for normal people. So he's not for waking up at 4 a.m. in the morning hustling and grinding. It is the opposite. He's for developing your career in the long term, little by little. And I completely recommend him. And then, of course, I have playlists about intersectional feminism, and myself, I have a podcast in Spanish, but I can leave all that on the show notes since it is something that I have easy access to,
Okay.
and we will leave them there, I hope.
Yes, that'll go in the show notes. And also just to add to, I mean, Cal Newport is terrific. Two other people, not only to select men, but these are people, I mean, there's Dory Clark, I think professor at Harvard, I'm not sure, but also Guy Kawasaki one, he's written a million books, and I've used them actually in my classes. And he was called evangelist at Apple, but one of the first marketers, and has a podcast called Remarkable People. Just amazing. So if you look up anything Guy Kawasaki, and then Seth Godin, who writes a lot about marketing, and he blogs every single day. I think he's been blogging for 15 years, just short posts, and he has a couple of podcasts. So I agree with that. And then the last thing is, you talked about your podcast. There's 2 or 3 parts to this question. So what are you working on? What is your preferred channel for people to get in contact or stay up to date on? Do you have newsletters at LinkedIn? And you talk about the podcast and course. So just anything you'd want to say, are there English versions or Spanish versions, or just, the cadence of those?
The best thing that a person can do is to look for me on LinkedIn. Click on the only link that I have there, which says free resources or recursos gratis, and that will lead them to a page where they can download my free guides. Once they do that, they will receive my free resources whenever I publish something new. They will receive it, as you said, as in a newsletter format, so as to say. And besides that, my other project in English, because I have many projects in Spanish that not all of your audience will be able to not profit from, but take advantage of. As we say in Spanish, profit from, but not take advantage of and enjoy. So the only thing that I have to say is that the English-speaking version of my course, Intersectionality and Decolonization, is coming up soon. It will target the same group, so professionals and advanced students interested in Latin America, or who work in Latin America, or who want to work in Latin America. And I am starting the creation process soon. So you will know more about this soon. If you would like to learn more about the training, go again to my LinkedIn profile, and there you will see everything you need to get
Okay.
my free resources and to follow me.
So thank you again for so generously sharing your time and wisdom and questions and really amazing insights. I actually wanted to ask a lot more about your research, but obviously I don't want to go over time at all. These show notes in the podcast, again, you can find our LinkedIn, but we'll have all the other resources that are mentioned. And as we start off in the beginning, thank you, Mara, and for people from joining us from around the world and sharing your interests, questions, and engaging. The 3 requests I said at the beginning: if you like the podcast, or If you hate it, please consider rating it. It helps us grow. And please, if you speak Spanish, please check out Mara's podcast. We'll put that in the show notes. Second is follow Mara on LinkedIn. Third is follow PCDN and consider signing up for a newsletter. And thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day. And obviously, it is a crazy time in the world, but thank you for all the work you do to put rights and well-being of children and youth at the center. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Craig, and thanks everyone who stayed here live and who will listen to the episode later. And I am at your service. If I can be of help to anyone, please write to me on LinkedIn. That's my